I am a licensed marriage and family therapist, specialized in the treatment of OCD and related disorders. When I think about the bulk of the material that I've written, it's just some of the amazing stories of courage and bravery, of audacity to stand up to the OCD that I learned from watching my patients get better. And that really inspired me. If you could pay more attention to where your mind is and enhance your ability to bring it back to the present more objectively, you'll find that your life is a lot easier to manage. In so doing, you have to be willing to take the risk, and this is where exposure therapy comes in, of letting it go. One of the things that's true about OCD is the more compulsive you are, whatever the subtype is, the more you are creating a world that's very much like the world that you're trying to avoid. Commonly overlooked compulsions in OCD in general is self-criticism and self-punishment. People tend not to think of that as compulsive.
Yeah.
Right? So, I'm hard on myself because that's going to help me to be a better person. Well, can you provide some evidence of this? Because I've seen you be hard on yourself for a long time and you don't seem to be making any changes, right? Like, people can get very attached to self-punishment, self-criticism, thinking that it's the moral thing to do, when in fact it's the compulsive thing to do. It's actually feeding the obsession.
Are you tired of the endless cycle of your obsessions and compulsions? And do you feel like OCD is ruling your life? Well, listen, you don't have to go on like this forever. As a licensed clinical psychologist with 25 years of OCD treatment experience, I know firsthand how debilitating the condition can be. But I also know that it can be managed with the right treatment. This is why I lead a team of top-tier clinical experts at NOCD. NOCD is an online platform offering specialized, accessible, and convenient OCD treatment. To get started with effective treatment for obsessive-compulsive disorder, head to nocd.com and book a free call with our team to start your treatment journey today. It's time to live the life you deserve and not the life that OCD wants you to live. And don't forget, subscribe to our NOCD YouTube channel so you can stay up to date with our latest podcasts and webinars. Now, on to today's episode. Hi, everyone. Welcome to another episode of the Get to Know OCD podcast again. I am Dr. Patrick McGrath, Chief Clinical Officer for NOCD, and today, John Hershfield joins me. John, Shepard Pratt, author, bookseller extraordinaire, maybe a good title. I don't know. Tell us a little bit about the work you do, John.
Oh, I'm just a regular guy. Thanks for having me on your show.
I know so much more than that. But
the G&G Burns of OCD podcast.
Yeah, that would be funny. We should do that one day. Yeah.
So I am a licensed marriage and family therapist who has managed to avoid doing marriage and family therapy for the bulk of my career. And I specialize in the treatment of OCD and related disorders. My position here at Shepard Pratt is the director of the Center for OCD and Anxiety. So we have an outpatient center where we treat folks at that level with for OCD and related disorders, which you know all about. And we also have a residential program here called The Retreat, an adult psychiatric program for folks with complex psychiatric needs. And I run the OCD programming here as well.
Beautiful building, by the way. Got to tour it. Lots of cool fireplaces that don't work whatsoever.
They thought they were going to need them, but then by the time they built the building, it was they had invented central heating. So now it's just good. It's a very old. It's 1853, I think, is when this institution started, and it's only had 6 presidents since. So the people who come to run this place run for a long time. Yeah,
that's impressive, actually. Wow, that's a long tenure per person.
It really is, and I may never get out of here, and that's okay because I love what I do.
When does your run for president begin of Shepard Pratt, John? When will that take place?
I think it's going to be a while. I got plenty of work right here on my desk before I start aiming any higher.
All right, that sounds good. Well, people know you obviously from a lot of the work that you've done through the International OCD Foundation, through the books that you've written, but you do come into the field from your own OCD experience. And I think that it might just be of interest for the one or two people listening to this who don't know who you are. Right? What is your entry into the field and has brought you into the world of OCD?
Yeah, thanks. Thanks for getting straight to the personal right in the beginning.
Yeah. Well, I'm just going to give it away. Yeah. So why not?
Yeah. No, it's apparently I have OCD. I mean, I'm still holding out for an 11th opinion, but I have been told by important people who I trust that
Yeah.
at various points in my life I needed help with this condition characterized by unwanted intrusive thoughts, and really just the difficulty kind of wrapping my mind around how to let some things go. And when things were really difficult for me in my late 20s, I found some. I got back into treatment, and I found some solace in online support groups. And at that time, these were these Yahoo email-based discussion boards. So you'd
Sure.
post a message. Here's what I'm going through. Some stranger would post a message. Oh, I know what that's like. Here's some tips and tools. And so I started reaching out, saying, here's my process. Here's what I'm learning in therapy. Here's how hard exposure therapy is. Here's what I like or dislike about what I'm being asked to do. And some of it was very compulsive at the time. I'd be sort of talking about like, but why can't it be like this? And I want it to be like that. And, kind of compulsing out to people, and they'd say, oh, I wonder if you're maybe seeking reassurance. Who are you? I don't know you. But then, as I started to get better and was sort of internalizing the tools of cognitive behavioral therapy and ERP and really applying them in my life, I started putting that outward towards the people I was interacting with in these online groups. So I started, giving counsel and advice to, random strangers, and finding that it was really quite gratifying. Not only did it help me understand what I needed to understand by kind of articulating it outwards, but, it's getting feedback of like, oh, that's really helpful. That means a lot. I got so into it that I started spending, enough time on it, kind of became the moderator of the group. Through that process, people were starting to ask, are you a therapist? Maybe you should become a therapist. And I was going through let's say a career drought, so to speak. So I had been an actor before that, and I had been working on and off, but the acting world is kind of interesting. Like, unless you really kind of make it, you have these days where you're king of the world. You've got your trailer, and you've got the food, and everybody's being really nice to you, and you shoot your scene, and you give your 2 or 3 lines, and then you're just unemployed again, right? And nobody cares about you, and you never exist.
Day 2, yeah, right.
It's very, for someone who, struggles with psychological issues, can be very destabilizing. And so, I was seeking some more meaning in my life, and thank goodness I kind of arrived at, maybe I should look into becoming a therapist. And in California, if you're looking into becoming a therapist at a master's level, you can typically either do a social work track or an MFT track. And so I chose a program nearby that had a good MFT track, Antioch University, Los Angeles. And just started doing everything I could. I'd make it about OCD. I have paper to write it about OCD.
Yep.
Project to do. Let's somehow bring it in, make it about OCD. And I was fortunate, after graduating, to get a gig working for an OCD clinic. So got trained up there. And then I spent some time working at UCLA in their intensive outpatient program for kids.
Mm-hmm.
Then I moved back here to Baltimore County, my hometown, and ran private practice for a while. And in 2020, joined Shepherd Pratt, and have not looked back. I'm very, very, very fortunate, very grateful for the trajectory it took me. And sometimes I think about like, well, what's really been the recipe for me for long success with my own OCD? And it might be a little bit different for the average person, because for me, I think it's actually thinking about and talking about OCD all the time, but like to other people, so I can never really forget, what are the rules here? Like, what are we really supposed to be doing? Therapists are famous for not applying this stuff to themselves. But because I am working in the field of the condition that I also live with, I think it's easier for me to sort of keep it both external and internal, for which I'm really grateful.
I think one of the things that's really cool on that is every year at the International OCD Foundation, you're involved in a support group for therapists who have OCD. And the number of people who attend that and who just describe what it's like to be in that room and the fellowship that's created, it's got to be just exhilarating to see all of these people who have come to the other side of OCD and now are giving back to the OCD community.
True story. So I've been to that group a few times. I didn't create it or run it. I think maybe Nathaniel Van Kirk runs that group. But I had gone to it a few times, and frankly, I stopped going to it because too many of my former patients were in it.
Okay, that makes a lot of sense. Yeah,
Yeah, so it's
yeah.
full circle.
But what a testament, right, to the work that we do, that now the people that we've treated have decided that this is what they want to do also. The work you've done, like the books and various things, are those inspired by your own experiences in your life, or have you found just there's a deficit either in the literature or in people talking about these areas, and that's what leads you, because you've gotten a lot of writing done. I don't know how you uh, keep a family and do work and write and exercise and do all you do, but I think you've cloned yourself, actually, is what you've done.
Well, I exercise at 6 a.m. while watching
Okay.
Netflix on my phone on the stationary bike, and most of my book writing gets done between sessions. You're supposed to stop the session at 45 minutes, and so that gives you 15 minutes to write, and I'll get around to the progress notes later. I got a book to write. I think most of what I've written is about my patients, actually. I mean, I obviously write from a personal lens, but when I think about the bulk of the material that I've written, it's thinking through just some of the amazing stories of courage and of bravery, of audacity to stand up to the OCD that I learned from watching my patients get better, and that really inspired me. So I think it's impossible to not write about yourself. So obviously it's in my own language and my own way of thinking about things. But I think a lot of what would drive me to write a book about when a family member has OCD, or something specific about OCD in teens or things like that. It's really just sort of watching people who needed those resources and thinking about the things that I've learned from them and told them about, well, if this was written down, maybe I could spread that message even further than just patient to patient.
Mm-hmm. And there's a new book. I think I don't know if you could talk about it yet or not. If you can't, that's fine. We will just let people know there's a new one coming, which is exciting.
And my pin code is
yeah.
No, I can talk about it. I mean, it's a work in progress. I was literally, while I was waiting for you to sign on, I was like, oh, maybe I could knock out a paragraph. So I'm literally working on it now. It's being a parent with OCD is the name of the book, or the working title anyway. Might change. It could be John Hershfield's Big Book of Parenting Stuff, but so far I'm going to call it Being a Parent with OCD. And again, that was driven from the fact that I've worked with so many wonderful, courageous, intelligent people whose OCD really either surfaced at the time they became parents or really blew up after they became parents. Because what happens, right? We always say it goes after the things you care about the most. And when you have a child, that becomes such a huge target for the OCD, both from the perspective of, how can I be certain that I'm doing everything I'm supposed to for my child to keep them safe, but also some of the existential and moral stuff about, like, am I a good parent? What kind of parent am I? Am I a good person? Am I a good model for my children? So in this book, I'm trying to look at it through the lens of a parent at every level, before you become a parent, when you have a baby, what it's like to have an adolescent, all with OCD, and how to think about how to take care of yourself with your OCD. Had a lot of patients who just felt like they didn't have enough resources, or were ashamed to ask for help. I'm supposed to be a grown up now. I'm supposed to be a parent. I shouldn't have this problem of having difficulty tolerating my contamination issues or my harm issues, my intrusive thoughts about the kid and things like that. I am noticing on this particular book, because I am also a parent, that I'm putting a lot of personal stories in here, mostly funny stories. And you've met my kids. Ridiculous parenting errors, or like interesting things that come up when you're a parent that you wouldn't normally think about until it's like right there in front of you.
So just for everyone, John and I are friends outside of the work environment. So, and we've hung out and everything. And I was thinking about today, John, and chatting with you, and some questions maybe I hadn't really thought of before, or asked, what was going to be new. And one of them is, your dad's in the field. He's a psychiatrist.
Yeah, we make him live out in the field, in the back field. Yeah,
he literally is in the field. Yeah, I've seen his office. It's in the field.
Yeah. For context, I grew up on a farm in northern, and my parents still live on that farm. And my father is a psychiatrist, and his private practice office is a nice, beautiful office. It was made in 1989. It still looks like 1989, and it's sort of built out of the side of a barn. So that's the joke.
Yeah, I think he still has a rotary phone and a fax machine in there, if I remember correctly.
I remember may start with a letter, actually.
But Do you think there was any influence of your dad being in the field at all, of you getting into it? Or was there at first, like, no, I'm going into acting, the definitely away from that whole thing. And then, now coming full circle into the family business, so to say, or something?
I mean, I've been asked that before, and it's impossible to know how people's the lives unfold. I knew since I was maybe like 6 or 7 years old that I was very interested in movies and characters and in being creative, and then I wanted to be an actor. And so I pursued that, well into my adulthood, and studied acting at NYU, and then I moved to Los Angeles and was working as an actor there. And it wasn't on my radar in any conscious sense. I did minor in psychology because I was interested in psychology, and I was sort of always around psychiatric concepts and psychology in some way. I mean, even if it's something like, even as like a little kid, seeing, paper notepads with the name of some medication on it or something like that, would be around the house, a pen that said Prozac,
Yeah.
So it's always been a part of my world. And one of my friends pointed out that I had some sort of knack for kind of downloading people's problems and kind of, being a good listener and being there for people. And so I guess I've always been attracted to the idea that a person kind of using their own mind and creativity could reduce the suffering of another person. And through that, I think certainly I've been inspired by my father being a psychiatrist, but it wasn't like, oh, I'm going to go into the mental health field. I really did come into it through my own mental health struggles. Since I've entered this field, however, it's certainly given my father and I a lot more to talk about.
Yeah.
And so it is kind of interesting how relationships, how familial relationships work, because it's sort of almost like a rediscovery of the father-son relationship now that I'm in the field. And so, maybe I'll write about that one day. We'll see.
Yeah. Next book. I am my father's son or something.
Something like that. Yeah. He's still working. I mean, my mother wants him to retire, but he loves his work, and he's been a psychiatrist literally for over 50 years. So
yeah, it's great. He's a good man and tells great jokes, by the way.
Famous for telling great jokes. Yeah.
When I do these, there are times that people want to talk about, or even outside of this, where people will say OCD must be kind of like a superpower, right? I mean, it must be help people be propelled, because you see people who are famous or who are athletes who have OCD. So I like to work on dispelling that myth. I like to say that people are athletes and famous in spite of OCD, right? Not because OCD was the thing that propelled them there. And I'm wondering your thoughts on that, the idea of, you are a successful therapist, you've got this great program, you've got these books that are out. Did OCD help you with those in any way? Or has it only...
It's a good question. It's a good question. I distinctly remember at some point checking in with my longtime therapist, while at the sort of pinnacle of things were going well in my career, and I was just checking in with them to work through something that was troubling me, and they said something along the lines of like, OCD's been good to you, and the rage that stirred up in me in that moment, towards this person who's been incredibly helpful and saved my life in many ways. I was like, nope, I don't think I like the sound of that. Yeah, no, I wouldn't say it's been good to me. I mean, look, people certainly. Some people derive a lot of strength from adversity, right? From kind of growing through traumatic experiences. I don't think anybody with PTSD would be like, grateful for the trauma they experienced, but they might find that the trauma, once more or less resolved, increase their resilience or their willingness to stand up to hard things or things like that. So I think OCD, like any other kind of challenge, could certainly result in somebody, recognizing that they develop strength through working through a hard thing. Most of the time when people say OCD helped me, they're talking about character traits that you can have without OCD, fastidiousness, being someone who works hard, or, a perfectionist or something like that in a healthy way. So, does like having something on in the back of my head that constantly tells me there's a book deadline coming up help me get books written? I guess in some way, but I could probably write those books without constantly being annoyed by the back of my brain.
Right. People have written books without OCD
yeah, exactly.
too. Yeah.
So yeah, I think that if your personal journey is one in which you're grateful for the adversity that you faced because it gave you these new tools. I certainly wouldn't take that away from anybody, but I don't go around saying thank God I have OCD. It helped me find my calling.
Yeah.
I think what gets overlooked too is like most people don't have OCD, right? I mean, it's
Right.
2 to 3% of the adult population, and in psychiatric terms, that's a relatively high statistic, but in mathematical terms, it's not. And when you see people who are successful and they talk about having OCD, it can sometimes give the illusion of it being this thing that like, oh yeah, everybody's got a little of it, and look, even these famous people. But those are just kind of remarkable people who happen to also have OCD.
Mm-hmm.
At least that's how I think about it.
Yeah, I have felt a similar way too, but sometimes it's difficult to convince people of that, right? That, and I'm not out to convince them. Oh no, this or that, but in the day-to-day work that I do, and I would assume in the work that you're doing as well too, no one's really thankful for OCD, right? I just don't hear people saying, "Wow, this was the best condition to ever have in any way whatsoever." Yeah.
I think the only way in which I could find an exception to what you just said would be if somebody is able to access a more global, mindful sense of gratitude. Like if you're grateful for being alive, and part of being alive is that you have some of these things that have made your life challenging, and one of those things is OCD. In that context, I think it would be fair to say that you are also grateful for OCD because it's part of the fabric of your universe. But that's very kind of abstract kind of mindfulness way of looking at it. I think for the most part, I totally agree with you. Why would somebody be jazzed about something that's causing them so much suffering? But they could be grateful for who they became after overcoming, mastering that suffering. So
yeah, one of the things we haven't talked a lot about here is mindfulness on the podcast, and you've done a lot of work in that area. You're amongst your group of friends. You're famous for going on silent retreats. Just
there's a two things: talking too much and being silent for a long period of time.
Yes, the juxtaposition is fascinating.
Fits and starts.
But could you tell everybody about mindfulness and what you see its role might be, or in OCD? Because people will ask about ACT and mindfulness and those types of things. So I'd be interested your take on that.
My attitude is that the mindfulness for OCD is not separate from mindfulness for everything else. As I mentioned before, the retreat here at Shepherd Pratt is a general psychiatric program that has an OCD a program within it. And so when I'm running the mindfulness group here, for example, I'll be speaking to a group of people, some of whom have OCD, some of whom have trauma or substance use issues or other types of issues. And I'm not modifying the message all that much for any of those different conditions, because what we're talking about here is suffering, and suffering is being caused by being lost in thought about the past or the future. And so you're thinking, something bad happened. I can't stand it. I don't like it. I wish it hadn't happened. Or maybe it happened in case of OCD. Could it have had happened? I'm not sure. Right. So that's not you actually showing up to be alive here on earth, present. So mindfulness is not an intervention. It's not something you do. It's a perspective you take in which you show up to the present moment exactly the way it is, without judgment and without thinking like, okay, this really needs to be changed. It's really just looking at things the way they are, like having the experience. So you might be immersed in the past. I shouldn't have touched that thing or looked at that thing or had that thought. Or you might be immersed in the future. This thing's going to happen. What if it happens? I'm afraid of the next thing, a disappointment coming up. And all of those things, when you're sort of inside them and you're not realizing, hey, I'm just thinking here, but you actually feel like you're in the movie, that's where a lot of your suffering is coming from. What makes OCD, the greater challenge than some other conditions in this regard is that when you become aware that you're lost in thought, it's very hard to just sort of drop it and come back to the present. You usually feel like there's something you have to do, like you're contractually obligated to figure it out or repeat the thing or get that reassurance. And then you're sort of allowed to return your attention to it. So you can imagine somebody who's like just, I don't know, relaxing and watching TV. and something happens in the show that triggers them, and then they start to think about it. Why did it trigger me? What does it mean? What's going to happen? Whatever. And they don't even know that that's happened. They still think they're watching TV, but actually their mind has completely left the project to follow the story and is now following its own story. And then they become aware, like, oh, I'm obsessing. And to be able to just be like, yeah, I'm not going to do that right now and go back to watching the show, that would be wonderful. But what tends to happen is something along the lines of, let me figure out my sexual orientation in this moment. Let me make sure I didn't actually want to hurt anybody, or whatever the obsession might be. Further kind of digging you into this process of being somewhere other than here, right? Meanwhile, you're getting older, right? So you're sort of missing out on being alive. And where we get a lot of our joy from isn't positive experiences or happy things or exciting things. Those are great, but we get a lot of our joy from just sort of being around when something joyful happens, when you're just sort of minding your own business and then you see a hummingbird and you're like, wow, that bird flies really weird, right? And like, wow, that's great. People miss out on so many of those moments because they're lost in thought. So, long-winded way of basically saying, if you could pay more attention to where your mind is and enhance your ability to bring it back to the present more objectively, you'll find that your life is a lot easier to manage. But in so doing, you have to be willing to take the risk, and this is where exposure therapy comes in, of letting it go when maybe there's some sense of moral urgency to spend more time with it, to figure it out, right? Maybe I let this thought go too quickly. Maybe I decided to let myself watch this show instead of try to figure out why I got triggered. And that feels like a moral quandary for a lot of people with OCD. Like, who am I to decide that this is just OCD? This is the battle with most OCD, right? Because if everybody could just be like, yeah, whatever, it's OCD, and let it go, then nobody would need any additional help, right? So,
right. Which is also why we don't use that as part of treatment. Just tell yourself it's your OCD, because if that worked, well, then no one would have OCD.
Right. Have you tried stopping it, for example?
Yes, right. Yeah.
So mindfulness has been very, unlike OCD, mindfulness has been very good to me. And initially I learned about it in a very kind of intellectual way, you meditate and feel better and relax or whatever. But once I started going to actual meditation retreats and spending a lot of time really kind of training myself to pay attention in that specific way, and I'm not saying this is for everyone or that everyone should do it, but for me, there was definitely a process of clouds opening up that really helped me to understand the difference between a narrative in my head and just an experience of my senses and my mental objects. And so it's been very helpful for me. And I try to pass this on to as many people as I can.
The other piece you brought up there is something that you and I are somewhat known for together, is the moral aspect of things, where we do a lot of work in the moral scrupulous area. We recorded a 3-part series that's on the International OCD Foundation with our friend Ethan Smith about moral scrupulosity, and have done a few talks in the area at various conferences, and we'll be featured this year on a panel discussing that as well.
Yeah, looking forward to that.
Yeah, me too. So what is your own interest in moral scrupulosity, and what are things you think people don't really know about it but should be aware
of? First of all, I just think it's fascinating because, again, part of the mindfulness idea is like it's a study of the human condition and where people derive their morals from, whether it's from their religion or from societal rules or from their family system or just their being fundamental human instincts. It's always kind of interesting to get to know someone to sort of see what's their moral frame. And for people who struggle with this in OCD terms, what's happening is they're kind of viewing moral incongruence. So this idea that they may have done something just slightly off from what they should have done as a kind of contaminant to their sense of self, their identity, their soul in some cases. And this contaminant can feel unbearable, right? Because it's like your self-worth is at stake, right? So it could be something that, human beings being imperfect as they are would be like, yeah, I guess that's like a minor infraction, like maybe you shouldn't have done that. But for the person with OCD, it just feels much more intense, much more urgent. And so the guilt, and it really is driven like equal parts guilt and anxiety. The guilt that comes from being triggered when you have moral scrupulosity is so out of proportion to whatever it is that you think you might have done, which in most cases is nothing, and in some cases is still essentially nothing. Just being a person. So I just think it's for me. I think it's the philosophical part of OCD that's kind of exciting to talk about and work with people and sort of help guide people into like, how can we make it so that your life is characterized by less suffering? Left to your own devices, you're probably going to suffer the most you could possibly suffer, because that's how you know you're a good person, right? How can we do less than that and see if it improves the outcome? I think it's poorly misunderstood. I think it's not exclusive to OCD. I mean, you certainly see it in trauma and in depression and in other conditions. It might look a little bit different, but still this sort of intolerance of human imperfection. And if we could soften that, if we could get some psychological flexibility in there, people always worry it's a slippery slope to being a bad person. But, look how you turned out, Patrick.
Yeah, I did okay.
You're up.
Yeah. One of the things we've talked about too is the underpinning of moral scrupulosity behind a lot of the other subtypes. So harm OCD could have a moral scrupulous aspect to it also, because what will people think of me as a person for having done this harm, right? Or for contaminating someone else, or for thinking about harming a child, and pedophilic OCD and all these areas, or how will my spouse think of me with my relationship OCD, right? So there may be these certain categories where we have subtypes of OCD, but there might be some larger catch-all umbrellas that a lot of those fall underneath as well. And I think moral scrupulosity would be potentially one of those larger umbrella categories.
Yeah, I would go as far as saying, with the possible exception of some of the just right and sensory motor types of OCD, moral scrupulosity plays some role in pretty much every part of OCD. Because like I was saying before, the decision to stop ruminating, the decision to stop avoiding, the decision to not engage in a compulsion, for the person feeling that internal drive to do so, that decision to stop is a moral decision, right? It's who am I to put myself first? Well, even the decision to seek help, right? To ask for attention, to ask for treatment. Who am I to, be so selfish as to, take another person's time to help me reduce my suffering? So I think, understanding how to be a person with strong moral fiber, right? Who really does care about what it means to be good in this world, and actually be able to enjoy the benefits of being in this world at the same time. That's the game that OCD is trying to keep you out of. It just says, like, you got to be perfect or else you're bad.
And for those, I always like to think about, for those watching, and that word scrupulosity sounds weird to you. It comes from the Latin scruples, and it can be defined almost like a little stone in your shoe, right? Something that's just there and that's annoying and demanding attention, but do you want to really stop and deal with it? And so then think of that as this little earworm thing in the back of your head, sitting there and demanding a little bit of attention, always kind of digging around, looking for something, and throwing out those doubts and those uncertainties at you. But from a moral side, that's where we would see moral scrupulosity. There could also be religious scrupulosity then too, and that's where most people, when they hear the term scrupulous, think of on the religious side of, have I been faithful enough? Have I followed the tenets of my faith to the letter of the law? Those types of things. But there is this moral side, and it could be anything from even, boy, I should probably wait at the store door again for the next several months, because I think when I left last time, I let the door go too soon. And what if it hit the back of the person's shoe and that injured them? I'd like to apologize to them someday. So I'll just hang out at the store in all of my free time. And in case that person ever comes in, I'll say, hey, several months ago, I don't know if you remember me, but you walked past me and I let the door go. And I think it might have hit your shoe. And if it did, I really do apologize. I hope it didn't scuff your nice gym shoes or something like that, right? Just
so the irony, and this is true of all OCD, is that compulsive behavior, that compulsive confessing and apologizing you were just demonstrating, right? For the person who's on the receiving end of it, that would be very disturbing, right? That would ruin my day if somebody came up and said something like to me. I'd be like, I think I'm gonna die today because there's so many weird things happening, and that was among one of them. one of the things that's true about OCD is the more compulsive you are, whatever the subtype is, the more you are creating a world that's very much like the world that you're trying to avoid. Right. So the classic example is if you want to be free of illness, you might find yourself having to wash your hands a lot. But if you wash your hands too much, you strip the skin of its protective oils, which makes it dry and crack, which, is how you get getting, openings in the skin and infections. What was the point of that? Right.
Right.
And so with the same thing is true of moral scrupulosity. When somebody is compulsively criticizing themselves all day, treating themselves unfairly, punishing themselves all day, in some cases hurting themselves, apologizing incessantly, confessing incessantly, avoiding situations where moral issues come up. They're actually creating a world for themselves where they are angry all the time, judgmental all the time, and making interesting choices like, lying, for example, because they're afraid they're going to hurt somebody's feelings. Right. They start to make choices that are incongruent with what they understand their morality to be.
Yeah.
And the same is true of religious scrupulosity, right? You see people who are afraid of having an intrusive thought about their deity, so they're avoiding going to their place of worship. And they're not praying and they're not practicing their religion the way they, it's creating distance between them and their faith. So that's, I think, some of the magic of ERP is it's about actually bringing you closer to the things that you want and understanding how the compulsions, although in the moment they might relieve some temporary distress, are actually bringing you not just further from the thing you want, but actually closer to the thing you said you didn't want in the first place.
Exactly. I've heard some people with religious scrupulosity talk about it. It felt like I was worshiping OCD, right? Instead of the deity that I was hoping to have a relationship with.
Yeah.
That it became the most important thing.
Yeah. And I just along those lines is one of the, I think, commonly overlooked compulsions in OCD in general, but particularly to moral scrupulosity. You see it in religious scrupulosity too, is self-criticism and self-punishment. People tend not to think of that as compulsive.
Yeah.
Right. So, I'm hard on myself because that's going to help me to be a better person. Well, can you provide some evidence of this? Because I've seen you be hard on yourself for a long time and you don't seem to be making any changes, right? Like if you can show me how beating yourself up actually improved your behavior, then maybe we could have a discussion. I mean, certainly none of the literature on how to raise children suggests that the more you punish them, the better behaved they are,
Right.
And no, actually you're teaching them how to evade punishment, how to evade you. So, and not you specifically, Patrick. You're not.
Well, yeah,
I've seen.
I don't punish. I don't even have children to punish. So I.
But just like people are can become very attached to their compulsions because it feels like it's giving them the relief that they need, whether it's hand washing or checking or researching things. I think people can get very attached to self-punishment, self-criticism, thinking that it's the moral thing to do, when in fact it's the compulsive thing to do. It's actually feeding the obsession. And I think I've had people struggle a lot to open up to that idea because self-compassion, which is a part of mindfulness, which is really just a part of being fair, is like an exposure, right? For someone who feels that they should punish themselves because their OCD is telling them that they're bad, treating themselves well is an exposure. It feels feel very threatening.
And I joke about that with the punishment, but one of the ERPs that I talk about with people is, if this punishment really works so well, why don't you treat everybody else in your life the exact same way, right? I mean, if you see them doing things that you find in your OCD to be bad things, go up to them and say, I think you should go punish yourself for that because that was really terrible, and see if anyone will speak to you ever again for the rest of your life.
Well, right? So the answer to that is just something like, well, I always put other people first, right? Because I don't like I should put myself last because I don't want to be a narcissist. To which my response is, don't you think about yourself all day?
Right.
Like, yeah, the OCD is giving you exactly what you didn't ask for.
Yeah. And still demanding all of the things that you're never going to get. On the religious scrupulous side, I say to people, your deity could show up in our session and say you're good, and your first reply will be, "Are you sure?" Right? You're just not going to get that level that you really want. Right?
And your deity would be like, "This guy."
Yeah. How dare you doubt me or anything of that nature? Yeah. Now that you're in the residential side of things, obviously it's a whole new game beyond just the work that we might do in the individual one-on-one hour or two a week sessions. So where do you see OCD in terms of when it's to the level of residential, because we've both had that residential side. Are there things you think that people could do earlier on to hopefully not have to use residential? Because as much as we were appreciative of the fact that people came to us for residential and we had a service, we'd also like no one to ever need our services ever again. I mean, that ultimately would be the greatest thing ever. So what do people kind of miss out on the levels, IOP, PHP, on the levels on the way up to residential, with that when they have that aha moment in residential, they start to think, boy, I could have done this earlier, but I chose to do these other things instead. Right?
It's a really good question. I wouldn't claim to know the answer. One of the most common things I see is people who were not given the opportunity to learn how to effectively regulate their emotions.
Okay.
So even whether it's from OCD or another condition, there are things that they find very upsetting, and the only way they've learned to deal with that upset is some kind of compulsive behavior or substance use or acting out in some way to get away from the intensity of the unpleasant behavior. No one has actually really kind of alerted them to the fact that that emotional regulation is a part of being able to think clearly so that you can solve your problems. So that might result in them being treated poorly by their family members or by their outpatient providers, like, oh, this person's unreasonable, or they're always acting out, or they're always upset about this or that, or they just won't stop doing this drug, or that's how they like it, and so they end up getting subpar care, and it's not their fault. And so by the time they end up in residential, they've now spent a lot of time having a relationship with their emotions that's just not conducive to functioning in this world. And so, getting triggered when you have OCD can be incredibly overwhelming. But again, you could be triggered to depression. You could be triggered, to be re-traumatized. You could be triggered to have urges to use. A lot of different things can set you off. And if you don't know how to observe and respond and make space for or adjust your emotional world, it's going to overwhelm you. And then you're just going to default to whatever it is you learned early on to do in those situations, which is the thing that's holding you back. I would say that, and this is a systemic problem. We have a mental health crisis in our country, and I think people, for a variety of reasons, at the outpatient level, are not getting the type of expert care and attention that they need from the outset. So they might be getting a lot of bad information from the internet, or they might be seeing a therapist who doesn't know a lot about OCD, and who's giving them information that's not helpful.
Yeah.
And they might have conditions other than OCD that are not being diagnosed, or might be diagnosed as OCD when they aren't, or might be OCD but they're being misdiagnosed as some other thing. So the other thing I see a lot of, besides difficulty regulating emotions here in our residential, is poor diagnostic clarification, right? They kind of have what they think they have, but actually they have something slightly different. If they'd known that earlier, maybe they could have gotten more effective help for it earlier.
Well, that's the whole basis behind NOCD and why we exist, to try to get more of that out there, because you're right. Stephen Smith's own experience of going to numerous therapists before he found an ERP therapist, and it led to things like picture a stop sign in your head, or snap a rubber band on your wrist, or something like that as a way to manage OCD.
Snap a stop sign over here. Yeah.
Yeah. Or yes. Just bang your head on a stop sign. Maybe that's it, right? Something like that. Before we go, are there, you've been in the field a while now, are there little pearls of Hershfield wisdom that you like to give out to people, or that you're kind of known for saying, and that you want to just have a little platform here to give to everybody else who might be new to working in OCD, or from the professional side, or from the patient member side?
Those are usually things I say and then forget about, and then they come back to me later.
Yeah.
Right. I remember a patient recently gave me the feedback that in the midst of us trying to sort out how she was going to get through this exposure, It was like, well, okay, so what's going to happen if you do this? They're like, well, it's going to be difficult. It's okay, but it's going to be difficult, but then you're going to, be stronger, and then you can go do this. Yeah, but I'll suffer in the meantime. And I said something like, oh, what's wrong with suffering? And that just stuck with them, like
Yeah.
these little kind of things where it's like, you're just assuming you can't do things, but you're
Yeah.
not actually looking at them. Like maybe you can. So I think a lot of what we do is hold hope for people when they're having trouble holding their own hope. And then you kind of eventually kind of pass it off. They can hold their own hope for themselves. So I say and go ahead. I'll give you a list of my patients. That would be a crime. And they'll tell you, well, here's one goofy thing John Hershfield said, and here's another.
Yeah.
I think that's part of the work, though. I think that's why I really love working in OCD is we throw people intentionally. We say things maybe you're not supposed to say, or you wouldn't be expected to say, because it gets them out of that repetitive pattern of like you're ruminating and thinking and compulsing or whatever. And you're like, why did you say that? And now they're looking at their experience from another angle. Professionally speaking, I think what sometimes gets overlooked, particularly in the OCD specialty realm, is that therapy is still therapy and your patient is still a human being, and that this is about relationships, right? So I think psychoanalytic traditions historically did such a terrible job treating OCD that there was this sort of response to like, okay, now we have good evidence-based care, we have ERP. And anything that treats a person outside of a manual that I'm holding right here in my hand is a no-go. Like don't ask about their childhood. I don't want to know about your parents. Just like right here in this moment, I think that's a bit of an overcorrection, and we use overcorrection in exposure therapy sometimes, but as a result of that overcorrection, so I find some newer clinicians kind of learning how to treat OCD get so sort of stuck in protocol that they forget that the most important thing in the beginning is actually establishing trust with the patient. Hey, you're a person, I'm a person. I'm going to help you because I have like some information that you don't have. I'm going to help connect it with the information you do so we can help you suffer loss.
Right. And that rapport is essential if you want someone to share some of their most innermost thoughts or what they think are horrible, awful, demonic, terrible things.
Yeah.
And
it's hard because sometimes, actually often, we talk about hierarchies, right? You start low and you work your way up, but the top of the hierarchy for a lot of people is asking for help or telling somebody about your intrusive thought, right? There's no way to hierarchy your way up to that. Once you've said, okay, I'm going to walk into a place that says OCD center on the top of the door. So taking the risk of saying maybe this is OCD could be a big violation of your OCD. So it takes a lot of courage to ask for that kind of help, but it's worth it.
Well, and you've proven that too in the work you've done on yourself and then in the work you've done in the field. So thank you, John, for being here today and sharing that with everybody. I appreciate it.
Thanks, Patrick. It's really an honor to be on your show. And thanks to NOCD. You guys are doing great work, helping a lot of people.
Awesome. And thank all of you for watching another episode of the Get to Know OCD podcast. If you like it, you can subscribe to the NOCD YouTube channel. And if you're looking for help for OCD, check us out at nocd.com. We'll see you again in another episode in the future. Talk to you soon.